Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the newest episode of the Cult Movie Podcast, Cult Potato. As always, I am your host, Campion, and joining me today is, of course, my effervescent co-host, the longest reigning champion of the 24/7 title, Mr. Grady Hooker. How are you feeling today?
I'm doing great. Again, I don't know if I agree with your introductions, but I will take whatever praise you give me.
What? I'm just saying that you're the longest reigning champion of the WWE's 24/7 title.
Well, technically, they crowned me WWE's greatest New Zealand fan like 6 years ago and never crowned anyone else, so you know.
Which carries the same importance as the 24/7 championship.
This is true, but Campion people did not tune in to hear about wrestling today. They tuned in to hear about the Labyrinth.
We'll get there at some point. Yes, today's film is, of course, the 1986 classic film, Labyrinth. Picked by you this time.
For once.
For this is the second episode, so you can't pretend as if I'm the only, I'm some sort of dictator who never lets you pick the films.
Prior to today, you had picked 100% of films.
Well, you got me there.
Facts.
Yeah, so we figured that since the first film we watched was something that I had seen but Grady hadn't, we switched it around. This is a film Grady has seen but I haven't.
I was utterly surprised you hadn't seen The Labyrinth.
Yeah, it's just one of those blind spots that you have, you know, something where you look at and go, oh yeah, this is something that I've never really seen before. I guess that's also the purpose of this podcast, because there's a lot of films out there that just neither of us have ever seen. So
yeah, and I think Labyrinth, as much as I made fun of you for picking an old film,
you picked something older.
I did, I really did. But it was just something that I know I enjoyed from my childhood. Like I'd seen it bits and pieces here and there as an adult, but I hadn't watched it start to finish, like with other people sitting down as an adult, so it was a great viewing experience for that, at least.
Yeah, because it's definitely comes off as a film that was, well, I don't want to say made for children, but it definitely has that, you know, that childlike quality to it. It's difficult for me to really describe. But before we get into it, you know, as I said before, this was released in 1986, produced by both Lucasfilm and the Jim Henson Company, Jim Henson being the director of this. Henson is, of course, this very well-known director who's done a lot of very well-known works. I think The Muppets and Sesame Street are far and away the most famous things he's ever done. But of course, he's also done stuff like The Fraggles and Dark Crystal. I also found, because going through the opening credits of this movie, there was just a lot of names that I'd recognized. Because, you know, it stars Jennifer Connelly. It was produced by George Lucas, which I was not expecting. I also saw Frank Oz came up as one of the puppeteers who worked on the film. Who's very well known for a lot of the work that he's done. And, of course, easily the most well-known and most famous person in this film, David Bowie.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, because I'd heard of this film before. Well, it's probably more accurate for me to say that I'd heard of David Bowie's crotch. It's probably the most well-known and infamous part of this film, or at least from my perspective.
Yeah. I'm gonna continue spouting internet rumors as facts because it's what I got told, and you know that's how things spread like wildfire. I could not confirm nor deny this, but. You know, all the, juggling work that Bowie does is another guy. I don't remember his name, unfortunately, but he would often have to, you know, be behind David Bowie and sort of shoving his arms through the coat and stuff. And Bowie worried that, his crotch would stink. So he shoved some potpourri down his pants to make it more pleasant for the guy, and that's the bulge. It's not David Bowie's natural bulge. It's some potpourri.
That's disappointing because I 100% believed before he said that was his natural crotch in there.
Maybe it is. Maybe the story's just absolute bull poop. Who knows? But I think, when we did Tremors, you opened up by asking me, the person who hadn't seen the film, what your impressions of it were. I'm going to throw that back on Mr. Hosty Boy here, and I guess what was your impressions of your first viewing of The Labyrinth?
I will answer that in a quick second. I am currently reading about David Bowie's crotch.
Okay, that's fair reading. I'm
getting a lot of different stories on that. I'm reading something where apparently that was like an intentional part of the film, I guess. But yeah, let's move on from discussing David Bowie's penis to just discussing the film itself. My initial impression of the movie, well, for starters, as I explained in the Tremors review, I really love practical effects, which is why a lot of these older movies tend to draw me in. And this is a Jim Henson film, so there's a lot of like puppetry and just a lot of practical in-camera stuff, and the set design is all absolutely amazing. I loved pretty much every visual aspect of the film. I absolutely loved. Yes, even the Bowie bulge. And I've always loved how Henson can just create all of these fantastic creatures, and even though if you just took the puppet on its own, especially by today's standards, it probably wouldn't look all that fantastic. But the way that they move, just how animated they feel, with how the puppeteers work, everything just makes them feel so alive to me. I always thought that the puppeteers that they have are just really fantastic. As I mentioned before, one of the puppeteers they had working on this is a man named Frank Oz, who's worked with both Henson and George Lucas on a number of things. In fact, his most famous role is that he's the puppeteer and voice actor for Yoda in Star Wars.
Yeah, it wasn't like... Because when you look at the cast list, other than, her parents, or I guess the baby even... There is very few human roles in this movie, sorry.
Yeah. The two main ones are Sarah herself, played by Jennifer Connelly, and of course Bowie, who plays Jareth, the Goblin King.
And both of them nail their role. I feel like, you need, especially if you're only going to have two humans really acting in the film, you need to have both of them nail it, and... Yeah. Bowie and Connolly were great.
Yeah. And it's great because usually because I've seen a lot of movies where they get like musicians or like really, really popular musical acts in as like a starring role, and I've seen them do, not so well. But yeah, Bowie just absolutely nails it. Like, you watch him and it's just like, oh yeah, you're definitely I think Bowie's pretty much good at everything he does, right? Like,
yeah, there's very few things he can't do. Like, they considered so many people for that role of who was going to be Jeff. Like, it was always going to be a musician, right? Because they have to sing, they have to do all of this stuff. But I'm just going to be spouting trivia this entire time because it's one of these movies I actually know trivia for. Is like, it was Jim Henson's kids who said, no, Bowie, we need Bowie, because it was like just after Let's Dance came out, and so he was like peak popularity at this point, and I feel like he capitalized on it perfectly, came into it. It didn't feel like they just shoved a musician in for the sake of having a musician in, and it really worked out. Like, if you isolated from the world, shown that to someone, they'd probably just say that there was an actor who could sing.
Yeah. Because I'm aware that he's done like a number of films, although this is the only one off the top of my head that I can name, except I think he also played like Nikola Tesla in The Prestige. That's the only other one that I know off the top of my head that he did. Although I'm I'm sure that he's done like a bunch of other ones.
I could tell you Twin Peaks, the TV series, would be the other thing that I'd point to Bowie in.
That does not surprise me.
And yeah, the guy pulls it off. We'll just continue here to just circle jerk about David Bowie for the next 40 minutes.
Yeah. Of course, this film also stars Jennifer Connelly, who after this went on to do a lot of things. She did some, funnily enough, looking at her filmography, a lot of the stuff that she had, you know, a number of mainstream successes, stuff like Requiem for a Dream, Beautiful Mind, He's Not That Into You, and Spider-Man Homecoming, which I did not know she was in. But she's also done like a bunch of cult classics that I've actually stuck on the list for future stuff for us to review. Stuff like Dark City, 9, Alita Battle Angel, and the Snowpiercer TV series.
Yeah.
A film that we have both joked many times that we intend to do at some point. In fact, there's a lot of cult movies like through lines and tangentially related stuff for this film, because of course it's produced by George Lucas, and while Star Wars it definitely isn't a cult classic, he's done a whole bunch of other smaller films that I think would also fit well for this podcast, like THX I think is a really good one. Jim Henson has of course done The Dark Crystal, which is definitely on the list for future reviews.
Yeah, and more facts, man, because all I got you is that trivia. I know you were talking about not even knowing that George Lucas was sort of attached to this project. And that's kind of to a point. Like, my understanding was that George didn't do pretty much any publicity for this movie because he didn't want to steal Jim Henson's thunder. Like, he wanted Jim Henson to be the focus of The Labyrinth is Jim Henson.
As far as I'm aware, he just served as a producer on the film, so that was about it. I don't even think he had anything I think his production company was involved, but he didn't have like he had barely any, if any, creative input into the film.
Yeah, I think he was on the screenplay a little bit, but nothing like crazy.
Funnily enough, on an early version of the screenplay, apparently Terry Jones of Monty Python's Flying Circus fame was also worked on an early screenplay. So again, there's a lot of through lines in here. Although, from looking at the cast list, you want to know who had the most surprising filmography out of everyone on this cast list?
Out of all of the humans?
Yes.
I feel like you're going to tell me it's the child.
It is the baby.
What did Toby end up doing?
Okay, so Toby, his actual name is Toby, by the way. Toby Froud is how I'm gonna pronounce it here. After this, he isn't well known. He didn't go on to be an actor, but he did go on to be like an artist / puppeteer / production designer, and he worked on a lot of like big stuff. He worked with Weta for a while. He worked on like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and the King Kong, like the Peter Jackson King Kong remake. He worked on an animated film called Box Trolls. Have you ever seen that one?
I have seen that, yeah.
Yeah, I love that movie. I thought it was fantastic. And he's currently serving as the production designer on the Dark Crystal Netflix series.
That's nice. Full circle.
Oh, production design supervisor, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's working. Yeah, so another Jim Henson property that he's still working on. And in fact, he's currently working on the new Pinocchio film, not the Disney one, the one that's being made by Guillermo del Toro.
Okay.
Yeah. So the dude's had a pretty successful career. Like, he's won awards for a bunch of the stuff that he's done. I know he made a short film a while back that won a bunch of awards. Yeah, dude's had like a really successful puppet and design career.
And all I can say, he nailed that role as Baby.
He did. No, but the thing is, most of the noises he made weren't even him. That was still Bowie.
Look.
That was still Bowie.
You needed a baby on the screen? He was a baby on the screen.
Hey, as his future career has shown, his talents were not in acting. They were, they lied behind the camera.
Yeah. And I think you opened up talking about like the practical effects of the Labyrinth as well. There was, because I can't just sit here and say how great the film was. Like, I think one moment where it for sure stood out to me where it wasn't practical, and I don't know if you noticed it or paid attention to it, but it was when the worm was talking fairly early in the film, and you can, that's clearly a CG worm that pops in, and you can tell where they've sort of slit the frame to have Connolly in half the frame and the CG overlay in the other half of the frame. And so
I thought it was stop motion, but you know more about this movie than I would, so I'm not gonna.
Hey, I might be wrong.
Because I thought that what you were talking about, because I know there is a CGI moment. It's the owl.
Yeah, the owl. Sorry, I'm probably mixing up my two. But yeah, there was just a few moments like that where you're like, eh. But other than that, it's fine.
Yeah. I read a bit of trivia online that apparently that's the first time a realistic CGI model of an animal was put into a feature film. That might be wrong, but this definitely feels like an early attempt to do that, and I thought it was pretty, it was a pretty effect
for the first time. Yeah, the first time's never good for anything. So if you can,
well, true. Like a decade later, Jurassic Park would be out. It's like, oh, okay, that's how we do realistic animals. Okay.
Like I'm assuming you can't imagine, like, if you were in 1986 when this film came out, the concept of CGI animals doesn't exist, and then somebody put that owl out and you saw that in cinema, it'd be amazing.
Yeah.
Now you compare it to what we do, where like 90% of movies are CGI. Less amazing, but for 1986 standards, pretty damn good.
And so, just moving on to like the actual plot.
Oh, the plot? This movie has a plot?
We've literally just been talking about the cast and the practical effects for the past like 20 minutes or so.
Didn't even know there was a plot to this.
It's a pretty, like the last film, like Tremors. I would say this doesn't have any like massive surprises in there. Not that they really intended it to. It definitely felt like they were going for more of the like a classic fairy tale kind of vibe to the story. In fact, the film opens with like this big panning shot of, well, not opens with, but it's in the opening of the film where we have the like a pan through of Sarah's room, and her room is just filled with like all of these old like storybooks of old fairy tales. Where the Wild Things Are is in there, which feels like a pretty obvious inspiration for the film, both in terms of its tone and the actual content of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it definitely felt like they were going for, like, because when we say fantasy, because whenever I say fantasy, the thing I think of is stuff like, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, but this is more of like the fairy tale fantasy side of things.
Yeah, like Alice in Wonderland, Wizard of Oz, kind of that sort of fantasy style stuff.
Yeah. And it definitely feels like, how do I say this? It had more of like with the logic of how the labyrinth and like the Goblin Kingdom worked, and how it felt like it was going for more of like a dreamlike quality to it, because the goblins, they and all the magic stuff just kind of show up, and she just sort of goes to the Goblin Kingdom. I think the heavy implication here is that a lot of this is just like a fantasy inside of Sarah's head, although it doesn't hard commit to that. That's just sort of the feeling like that the tone of the movie kind of gave for me.
Yeah, I was gonna bring it up, but I was like, I'll leave it till the end, but if you're gonna bring it up in the middle, let's bring it up in the middle.
Now, mate.
Yeah, to me, 100%, and it's probably one of those like open up to viewer interpretation things. This is 100% in her head. I have no doubts about it. They hearken to it way too much. She's reading the book, The Labyrinth, at the start of the film. She's reading lines out of this book, and then she uses those lines in the climax with David Bowie. She's got a figure on her desk of the Goblin King. Half of the characters, like Hoggle and Sir Didymus, are stuffed toys in her sort of piece. The dog is literally her dog. I fully believe that she just got really sick of this baby and went back and fell asleep and had this dream about losing the baby and getting Toby back.
Yeah, or even if it's not a dream, it's something that it's like a, because we see at the beginning of the film how she's playing pretend in the yard with her dog, like how she's dressed like a fairy tale princess. Her mother's telling her, you need to stop doing these kinds of things. You're 16 years old. This isn't something you should be doing. You could say that this is just her, playing pretend or making believe. And then the film, because it is like not quite. Would you call it a coming-of-age film? Because it has those kinds of qualities for me.
Yeah, she learns a lesson by the end of it and becomes a more mature person out the other side.
Yeah. Because a lot of this, especially from a lot of the stuff that I've read, this is a film about, growing up or reaching to maturity. Well, reaching maturity in front of David Bowie. So take that how you will.
They said it pretty literally around some aspects of, when it was all over and the characters were sitting behind her and they were like, we'll always be here if you need us. Yeah. That did scream like she's sort of leaving that make-believe life behind her a little bit, but that they're still there. You don't have to give up being a child or having fun to go be an adult. You can do both.
Yeah. And as a little interesting tidbit, just watching the movie, because I watched it twice, and on the second run through, I kind of paid more closely attention to the stuff on Sarah's desk.
Mm-hmm.
And if you pause it, you see that there's this newspaper article on her desk of because in the film she has she's living with her father and her stepmother.
Mm-hmm.
However, you see a clipping of her biological mother on the desk. And it hints at the reason why her father and mother separated. And it's because her mother is this actress who has started dating this other famous person, and that famous person is literally David Bowie.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just that's why Jareth looks like David Bowie, because apparently David Bowie is dating her mum, which is what broke up her family.
Yeah, I that just comes again to that. It's got to be some form of make-believe, some form of dream. The only reason, I guess, I lean towards dream more than make-believe is just because she does come out of a different person. She learns a lesson through it. Yeah. But it allows you to do whatever sort of fantasy stuff, as you say, where, a whole goblin city did just rock up to her backyard. And we don't have to question it. It's 13 hours in a day all of a sudden, or 13 hours on a clock.
Yeah, and I do love how, as I said before, I do love how the whole fantasy kingdom, it just kind of just shows up, just with, there's very little build to it. It's more Sarah's telling us, the scary goblin story to her little brother, and then we just smash cut to the goblins, who are apparently just watching her, being like, "Come on, just say the words. Just say the words. It's going to be these specific words, then we can come in."
Yeah, there's a few points like that where you're just it's comedy, right? It's not just pure fantasy or anything, and that's probably the first laugh of the movie, I think. It does keep continuing, the Bog of Eternal Stench will forever be funny to me. I will always be a 3-year-old when that's on screen. And the way that
how they have that one little stench geyser that looks exactly like an anus. It's making fart noises.
And when Ludo steps on the rocks, they each fart on every step, all 7 of them. Look, fart jokes are funny.
It's it's a family kids movie.
And so yeah, it's comedy. You will laugh through it probably. It's not crazy or anything. But no, it's I wouldn't say it mixes. I wouldn't say it's action at any point. I wouldn't say it fits into all of these other ones. It does rely on its fantasy aspects quite heavily. Whether we're smash cutting from these puppet goblin characters and we're sort of fighting them in a labyrinth, and then we smash cut to David Bowie and his bulge just doing a whole sing-song with a baby.
Well, he's fondling his balls.
Yep. And then we smash cut and we're like in a like ballroom dancing scene, which to me is still the weirdest scene of the whole movie.
That was a straight... It's a straight up terrifying scene, and I say terrifying. It's not terrifying as in horror. It's terrifying in that there's a bunch of masked strangers fondling a 16-year-old girl. Which, don't get me wrong, I think that's the point. It's supposed to be really uncomfortable that this young girl was roofied and now is apparently being fondled by a bunch of weird strangers while being stalked by David Bowie. Although I don't know if many people would consider being stalked by David Bowie to be terrifying. In fact, I imagine a lot of people would be really into that.
I feel like, and maybe I'm reading too deep into it or anything, but it feels like that's like everybody else having their opinions of her. Because she very literally shatters the mirror at the end of it and like breaks out. And it feels like that is everybody's opinions on her just rattling around in her head on who she should be. While David Bowie stalks her. And I was watching it with other people, and there were multiple times where they just looked at me and went, is David Bowie hitting on this girl?
And I'm pretty sure the answer to that is yes.
I'm not 100% sure how canonically old he is.
Well, as far as I'm aware, they all but explicitly state it towards the end that he's effectively like a figment of her imagination.
Yeah.
So.
She just... Nope, not going there. Retracting that joke.
Yeah. Although I will say I was very surprised at how much like of sexual undertones there were in this movie, because there's a few. You can't deny that they're there.
What could you be talking about? Possibly.
Well, again, the ballroom scene I feel like is the biggest one.
Yeah, it sticks out to me just because I don't know if it... Like, it's got its place, but it just doesn't seem like it fits.
It isn't as egregious as the tunnel scene from the original Willy Wonka movie, but it feels in that similar kind of vein.
It's to make you feel uncomfortable, I think.
Yeah. Well, also with that the other scene that made me feel uncomfortable was that dance scene with like the red creatures who could detach all their limbs and stuff.
Look.
That made me go, okay, I know it's a Jim Henson movie, but calm down, mate.
This, as a child...
A bit too much for an 80s movie. Well, for a kid's movie, sorry.
As a child, that scene scared the ever-loving shit out of me. Like, we would fast-forward that scene when it came on when we were watching it on VHS. Yeah. Because I did not like the Fireys at all. I don't know what it was about them, the fact that they were removing limbs, I don't know. Yeah. I just couldn't take it. It's one of those
things that you look at and you're like, why did you put this in a family movie?
It's also horrendously green screened.
Yes. Actually, was this pre or post Dark Crystal? I don't remember.
I believe... Let me scroll up. Dun. Post. 4 years later.
Really?
Yep. Dark Crystal, 1982.
Oh, wow, you're right. Wow, that's surprising. Yeah. Because, like, the Dark Crystal had, like, a bunch of, like, dark stuff in there, but I feel like that was just more the kind of vibe it was going for. Because that was like, it's a kind of dark fantasy kind of story, whereas this one, it's a fairy tale thing. Most of it is safely pretty PG and pretty,
I haven't looked it up, but I bet this was a G rating when it first came out. Like, it would have been lowest rating, right? Surely.
I don't know. I feel like the Bog of Everlasting Stench with the farting anus.
Alright, it was PG when it came out.
Yeah, I feel like some of the stuff, that and Bowie's Bulge, I feel like some of that stuff may have bumped up the rating just a bit.
Does Bowie's Bulge immediately make it a PG film? Oh, the MPAA rating's G. Everybody's got different rating systems for it. But I'd still, even with the fiery scene and even with David Bowie's Bulge, I'd still say like this is fine to show in front of like young children because they'll just skip over that, right? Other than me and my nightmares about fireys, in general, you can show this to a kid and it'd be perfectly fine.
Yeah, I'd say you're right there, especially since it's a musical. There's a lot of songs in there that I think kids would like. Although, hot take here, I think that most of the songs in this film aren't very good. There's one really good song.
Oh, there's one
I'm pretty
good
sure
one.
we both know which one it is. I thought the other songs were actually pretty bad.
Yeah, I feel like everybody does focus on that one, right?
Yeah, like the Dance Magic Dance.
Yeah.
I don't even know if that's the actual name of the song, but Dance Magic Dance is that's the big one from this film, whereas all the other ones are either forgetful or just bad. Like, I thought the Fiery song was actually a pretty terrible song. Like, I genuinely can't even remember any of the lyrics or what the tune was like for that.
It's called Magic Dance, I believe.
Okay. I just say Dance Magic Dance because that's what he says in the... And that's what I've seen everyone call it. I think that's just because that's what Bowie says in the movie.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's... Yeah, I... Be honest, in my brain right now, if you ask me, and I know this movie is like a musical movie, the only song I could tell you was Magic Dance. I can't. I couldn't point you to any other song that was in this movie or any
Funnily
moment.
Enough, it's the song that's the most heavily involves Bowie, so
that's what's important.
Go figure that. I think he does like one other kind of song towards the end, where Sarah confronts him in the MC Escher-esque staircase room. Which, by the way, fantastic scene.
Loved it.
That was so cool. Like,
favorite scene of the movie.
Even for 1986 effects, like him, walking around on the ceiling and all those different staircases, still looks really cool.
It is honestly my favorite scene to the movie. The climax after it is a little bit of a letdown, but I like this as what is essentially a boss battle, I guess. I really like it.
Yeah.
The staircases, like even though you can see like, oh, he's rounding that corner on a wire or whatever, it still looks good. It still gets across that sort of uncomfortable feeling because you are dealing with the Goblin King and he's still messing with you.
Yeah, like this really powerful magical figure who could like defy gravity and stuff. And I think that even though the wire work and the effects and the like camera angles they use really help to sell it, but I think what really hits the effect home is just the way Bowie moves. Like how he has this almost unnatural cadence to the way he walks when he's like walking on the ceiling and stuff.
Bowie was a highlight. If we're going to list highlights of this movie, Bowie wins.
Well, I think we've already established that the crowning highlight of this film are the practical effects and Bowie. You could have just had those two, and it would have been still been a fantastic film.
Yeah, maybe a few other things, but yeah, those are the two elements that really picked up. Which, being a Henson film, you knew it was always going to be good with those practical effects.
Yeah. And having David Bowie, you're like, okay, he's just going to be really charismatic and awesome and like really fun to watch.
So here's the question that sort of came up, and at my viewing of this film, we went, okay, what would happen if they do a 2021 or 2022 remake of Labyrinth? We assume it's basically the same story. It'll probably be mostly CG. Who plays Jareth? Who would you possibly be able to cast as Jareth in a this year remake of The Labyrinth?
I don't know, because like Jareth is pretty much everything about him is just so inextricably linked to Bowie. It's a bit like trying to recast Hannibal Lecter. Like it's just one person for that role, and I don't think you can find anyone else to do it.
It would be a very tough one. We didn't have an answer for the record, even though that question came up. We couldn't pick anybody that we were like happy with casting.
Yeah. I think what you would do is you do what they did when they remade Aladdin. You just cast someone vastly different.
Yeah.
Because like there's no other Robin Williams, so let's just get Will Smith in. I mean, he's completely different to Williams.
Yeah.
So I think what I'm not saying we cast Will Smith as Jareth, even though I would love to see them try.
The only name that actually got thrown out, and it is that same concept, right? Because we were trying to cast just so differently, thrown out by my girlfriend was Zendaya, as just something that was completely and utterly different, but has the charisma to pull the role.
Huh.
Goblin Queen.
Is Bjork still alive? I'm serious. I think we just get Bjork in. I'm serious.
Campion, I don't have the money to buy the rights to Labyrinth. We're not making this film.
Well, you say that they are working on a Labyrinth sequel, so I have no idea what they're going to do.
Look, no comment. To me, this film is great as a standalone. I would prefer a remake to a sequel. Like, if it is in her head and, like, that's the whole point, where do you go from here? The Goblin City was all in her head. It was a dream. What do you want to do? Do you want to knock her unconscious and go back to that? Like,
well, you could do something, like, where I still feel like well, obviously, you couldn't make a sequel without the Henson Company involved.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that doing so would just completely miss the point of the original. You could just have another fantasy land.
It's true.
Like, just go to a different place.
Yeah, it's always
like maybe,
possible.
Like Sarah's daughter. Like, maybe you have a few returning characters, like Ludo or Sir Didymus, or even the Wise Man. I don't know if I mentioned before. I talked about Frank Oz earlier. The Wise Man, the guy with the bird on his head.
Yeah.
He was played by Frank Oz. That's the character he played.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's possible to take that.
Bjork is still alive, so we could. I'm telling you,
we're not casting Bjork.
Bjork as it doesn't even have to be the Goblin. We could have a different, evil fan. She could be like a completely different.
It's true.
Evil. Like evil fantasy creature. I mean, we don't have to keep. We could keep going to Tolkien, right? We can make it orcs. So I don't know, the Orc Queen or something.
Well, that's the thing, like, that came up from this as well, just to slightly sidestep, is that this wasn't necessarily how goblins are portrayed, at least nowadays. Like, They're not just green-skinned, like, swamp monsters. There was a lot of variety to what a goblin was. Jareth is a goblin king. I don't know if the implication is that he is also a goblin, or if he just rules over the goblins.
Because I went ahead, I looked up both background stuff and stuff from all, like, the spin-off, like, novels and comics and stuff, just to find out what Jareth is. I think the consensus that I found was he's not a goblin, maybe kind of, sort of, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Just kind of not.
I saw something that's like, he's because in one of the sequel, like, I think it was like one of the comics or something, apparently he was like a former human who was made the king of this land by the former king, like the Owl King or something.
Okay.
Yeah, but I do prefer. I would much rather have, like, the whole this is all in Sarah's head, so he's just a figment of her imagination. I think. Yeah, I think if you were going to make a sequel, you're doing something like, this is about her daughter, and maybe her daughter, like, her mother maybe tells her about this, or she finds the old Labyrinth book, like, in the attic or something, and she reads through that, and that's what conjures up. Because that way you could still have the Goblin King, but we can explain, this is why it's not Bowie, because her daughter's reading it, but she maybe has a different view of what the Goblin King looks like.
It's true. She could have her own dream interpretation of this world.
Yeah, and her interpretation, she's a big fan of Bjork, which is exactly why the Goblin King. It's like, Bjork, I don't know, maybe she just watched Spider-Man Homecoming, so that's why it looks like Zendaya.
I'm trying not to just die laughing at this point. We're not casting Bjork.
Even admit it, you would watch that. That would be a fascinating movie.
Yeah, I'd watch that.
Or Danny DeVito. Let's just go all in at this point. I don't know.
Can he sing?
Actually, not that surprisingly well. He did have when he played Phil in Hercules, he did have a musical number.
Okay.
He can hold a tune, even though his voice is fantastic, but I don't think it's suited to singing.
Mm-hmm. So I think overall, like, I talked about how last time with Tremors, I would struggle to suggest this film to people who hadn't already seen it, like, because it feels like it's only really applicable to cult classic people. The Labyrinth, I feel like you could put in front of any child and they'd sit down and be enamored with it to a point. could you convince adults to watch it? No, they'll probably pick apart, the fact that it's 80s tech.
Yeah.
But it's a nice fantasy world for a kid to get immersed into very easily.
Yeah, I feel like you could show it to a kid or a teenage girl who has a crush on David Bowie.
Also,
which, as I'm aware, was very popular, which is why this was very popular with a lot of teenage girls in the 80s growing up. So,
yeah, to be fair, look, you got the Labyrinth growing up, you got all the female girls with their crushes on Bowie, and you got all the teenage guys with their crushes on Jennifer Connelly, so it kind of works out.
Exactly. I am aware that a lot of people watched this as kids growing up purely because their mothers had crushes on David Bowie. So that's why they wanted to watch it.
It's a good, like, again, those two human characters do so well and reach out to different sections. Like, I will always say that Jennifer Connelly is great in anything she does.
I can't wait till we get to Dark City with her. That's gonna, that's gonna blow her. That's gonna blow your mind.
Is it gonna change my opinion?
Oh no, it's not gonna change your opinion. It's just gonna be, you're gonna have a very interesting opinion on that movie.
Okay.
The thing is, I haven't seen it. I just know it by reputation,
Gotcha.
and that tells me that that film's gonna be a ride. But before we close, because I feel that our discussion about this film is kind of drawing to a close here. If you had to pick one scene in this film, like just for the practical effects itself, like actually, what was your favorite like monster or creature in this film?
It's hard because like Hoggle had so much like personality and he had an arc. I feel like he's one of the only characters that had an arc that wasn't one of the human characters.
Yeah. While you're thinking, I'll just tell you what mine is.
Okay.
It's that scene where they get to the goblin city itself, and before they can get in, the gates close on them. Mm-hmm. But when they shut, it manages to it shuts. But imprinted in the gate is this giant iron golem. So it's like split down in half because half is on one door and half is on the other. But when it joins together, it completes the golem, and it just like pulls itself out of the door and starts going at him. I thought that was just really cool. It's just such a creative way to put a monster together, and I don't think I've ever actually seen it. Okay, I've seen it once, and that was in Kingdom Hearts, but that doesn't count. Yeah, I don't think I've ever quite seen that in a film, and especially since it was like this mass. Well, I don't know how big it was, but it's like this, big model, and puppet of this giant creature. I thought it was really cool.
So, favorite character and favorite scene. Favorite scene's easy, right? Like it was the Escher staircase one. Like we already talked about that one.
Yeah, that's my favorite scene as well. But favorite creature, Grady, doesn't just have to be for character. It can just be because it looks cool.
Do you remember the piece where Hoggle was taking her through, and the walls were talking and warning you to go back?
Yeah.
The very last one who just really wanted to say his line because he never gets to say his line. That one.
That made me laugh. He was just like, oh, but I never get to say it. It's like, and he's just like, oh, fine, just hurry up. Oh, yay! I don't know. That really endeared me to that one talking Moai-esque head.
It was, and like when they walk off, he's like so happy that he got to say his line. It was, I like that.
Yeah, it was cool that they put that in because prior to that, I thought that the talking walls were kind of freaky.
It was, I don't know if it was a trope at that point, but obviously it is now, right? Like, so it was perfect ending to those talking wall scenes. It's just to have this sort of funny note at the end.
Yeah, I like how it's something that's kind of freaky, but as they're walking through, she's like, "What? They're telling us we're on the wrong way," and he's just like, "No, don't listen to them. They always say that." And I thought that might have just been, Hoggle's just lying because at that point, he's still kind of allied with Jareth. And then they get to the last one, and he's just like. And he's like, "Oh, turn back." And then Hoggle's like, "Can you please shut up?" And he's like, "But I never get to say my line." It's like, oh, wait, no. So they're actually talking out of their ass. Okay. Yeah.
So I'm gonna put that. That's my character of choice out of this, or creature of choice.
Yeah. And, so I think final thoughts on this film. Really enjoyed it. Mm-hmm. As we've said many times over the course of this review, Bowie and the practical effects are far and away the highlights for this. I can't wait till we cover some of Henson's other works, because we're gonna do The Dark Crystal. I feel that if you're talking about cult movies, I feel like that's a pretty big one out there.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing what else you bring onto my plate, since you let me pick one for once. So I picked one from my childhood, then you'll inundate me with 20 of your picks, because you are the dictator of this cult potato show, and making me watch all of your horrible old movies.
Aww. Don't say that. Okay, I feel like for future picks, you say as if I'm dictating it to you. What it probably is going to be is that we just have a list, and then it's like, oh, what do we do next week? And we just pick something from the list.
Look, you've already told me you're going to make me watch The Thing, okay? You've already decided that was next, and he was like, Grady, watch The Thing.
But as we close off the discussion of Labyrinth, the film itself on the release didn't do so fantastic like a lot of cult films out there. It had a budget of $25 million, only managed to gross $12.9 million. But like many other cult films before it, it managed to find a home on VHS and television. It spawned a number of like sequels and pseudo spin-offs. Not films, but things like comic books, novels. There's even a manga. Like, I don't know if you've seen anime David Bowie.
I've not.
But I would highly recommend. Hang on, I'll actually.
That's fine. I'm googling. You keep talking. Okay. Wow. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Anime David Bowie is something to behold.
Wow.
It's funny because when I heard about it, I thought it would be anime, as in, like the old school kind of chippy, cute kind of anime, but they go for more like the pseudo-realistic, Death Note-ish kind of anime design, so I like that a lot. And as I mentioned earlier in the review, there is currently a sequel in production. No idea if it's ever, like, when it's ever going to come out. I think there are talks that it might even just be a straight-up reboot of this. So, who knows how that's going to go. And, yes, so Grady, any final thoughts before we close out the show?
Good movie. I'm glad you've finally seen it.
Yes. I think that's my sentiment as well. Good movie. Glad I finally got around to seeing it. So, of course, thank you everyone for joining us today here on the Cult Potato Podcast. When we return next time, we will be covering one of the most beloved horror movies ever made. I think it's up there. It's up there. We will be talking about John Carpenter's masterpiece, The Thing. I have been Campion, joined by my good buddy Grady, and I hope to see you all next time.
Bye.